Good morning, everyone. My name's Mike Taylor. I'm from the University of Queensland, and I'll be the chair for these sessions this morning. So this session is 3 key strategies to help you prevent the next big data breach. I'll just go through some housekeeping, main one being the mobile phones. So if you could just make sure they're on silent or not going to interrupt the sessions. So today's speaker is Ben Adamson from Mimecast. Ben Adamson has joined the Mimecast Australia team with more than a decade of experience in the IT industry. Acting as a product evangelist and raising awareness of the Mimecast solution, Ben's role sees him working closely with the regional leadership team to best enable APAC enterprises to tackle the significant challenges posed by the diverse email infrastructures. Can you please welcome Ben Adamson?
Thank you. So what we'll aim to do today is not necessarily spend a massive amount of time on the Mimecast products. We're going to try and do some industry insights, understand what we're seeing from our customers and across the user base in the email threat landscape. There's 3 predominant sort of threat vectors that we'll talk about, and then towards the end I'll sort of talk a little bit about how we deal with those. But I think the key thing is just taking away that understanding that we're in very much a new sort of landscape from an email threat point of view, and how we deal with that, how we address that from an organisational and strategic point of view has changed quite a bit over the last maybe 12, 24 months. So first of all, recognising that the kinds of sort of phishing threats that we've seen, really common ones where we get the mass mail outs of your sort of Australia Post Parcel Collection, your Australian Federal Police, they're sort of nothing new. But that idea that you have something introduced into an environment which is beyond the capabilities of a normal antivirus, anti-spam layer, and it involves the interaction of a user doing something with that email for the threat to be effective. So whether that's for you to end up with a crypto wall or a crypto locker, whether it's for them to go off to another website that's a dummy website and give out some credentials, that kind of thing. We're talking about something that's sort of often a multi-stage approach, so 1 or 2 steps removed from having something that's actually attached to an email. The other thing that we recognise from our research is that people actually action these emails. So they're quite convincing, they're socially engineered. If they arrive in somebody's inbox, there's a very high likelihood that they'll be actioned, and within a very short period of time. So that time that we have as network administrators, etc., to actually intervene is quite limited. So naturally we look for technology kind of responses to those. The other thing that we're finding is that because of the ease of entry into an organisation via the email method, it is becoming a predominant attack vector. So this is probably very different to what we'd seen in previous years, where we'd be talking about a more wholesale interception network type style attack, where we've seen a lot of resources turned around to sort of trying to foster these email type introductions into an environment, and we'll have a look at that, sort of how that presents itself as we move forward as well. But just the idea that that sort of shift has occurred, where, as before, things related to email were more likely to have nuisance value, talking about things like worms and then maybe sort of spam, where you've got sort of, unwanted email arriving in the inbox, but it's more of a clutter thing than anything else. It has really now moved to being something that has a massive tangible impact potentially on, individuals and also on organisations. So the idea of a breach is also very much newsworthy as well, and this is a bit of a change. So we're seeing that as breaches occur, whether it's in Australia or internationally, we'll find that it actually hits the news lines. It's something that's topical for people to know about, and there's a bit of sort of value there in terms of personal details often being released, and that providing into the public forum some information that wasn't there before. So Ashley Madison was a good example of that. It was obviously sort of provided people with a bit of excitement, but we see that being another sort of factor in terms of people's mind share or the space where people are thinking, because it goes beyond now protecting our email environments so that we're not having sort of a little virus outbreak or some spam coming through. It really starts to be, I guess, a matter of compliance or trust in terms of the protection of people's information, and that's sort of our own users in our own organisation, but also any of our business-to-business partners, any of the third parties that we deal with, our customers' information, our employees' information. all of that can now be exposed via these email type attacks where we're having people extracting large volumes of information. And we've seen that in America recently with the W-2 type fraud where we've had whole year tax details being disclosed. The other thing worth noting is that in Australia we don't have an environment of mandatory reporting. So a lot of these cases that we talk about are US-centric, but the reason for that is that because at the moment we don't tend to have that compulsion for people to report, we are going probably to see that change. It has started to sort of hit the radar a bit more strongly. So being prepared for an environment where if you are breached or if you have an attack, you do need to disclose to the government. It does become public record. That's something else to sort of be aware of. But even at a personal level, I think people are now more aware of the idea that at some point in time, someone may have acquired their information. And we even have websites out there where you can sort of just go in, put in your email addresses. It'll compare against all those lists that have been made publicly available. And you can understand whether you have been owned or pwned, as the sort of elite geek or the hacker people call it. And that speaks again to something we'll sort of get onto in terms of the idea that the motivation for these crimes isn't necessarily related to the size of the organisation or the wealth of an organisation or the public profile. It's very much just motivated by the ability to complete the attack itself. So the compromise is what is the outcome in a lot of cases. So it's difficult for organisations to profile themselves and just sort of say, oh, hackers wouldn't be interested in us. It's very much a wholesale sort of attack that we're seeing. And the impact is big. So there's tangible outcomes in terms of potentially just transferring out a whole lot of money to the wrong person, paying an invoice that's false, not being able to get that amount of funds or money back. And then also in terms of whether there's liability associated with that. So we'll often see that there'll be an initial cost and then there'll be cost associated with remediating any legal claims. In terms of identity theft, when personal details are disclosed, often we'll see the response to be that organisations will then have to pay for personal information or identity theft insurance for all of the people that were affected. So we're sort of seeing very much a tangible, definite outcome. And the figures are big. So for the kinds of, as I say, they're quite American-centric, but they're companies that we can all sort of point to and understand who they are. We would assume that they would have quite mature, well-funded security teams behind them. So it's sort of despite that they've ended up in this scenario. But really sort of starting to see that we've got that initial cost and then potentially the liability cost, having to sort of atone for the fact that the information wasn't well protected. And it feeds into this idea of a black market. So we've seen that recently. I think the latest one I've sort of seen is that the LinkedIn details that have been for sale. But what will tend to happen is this information will be gathered up, will be packaged into something that can be resold, and then it'll be sold in that sort of dark net market that we see, or the dark web. And the costs are sometimes high, but often quite low. So it's surprising, sort of for a few $1,000s, you can often buy a very large number of personal details. And as I said before, it's all often motivated just by this idea of owning you, owning your company, owning the data, just sort of being able to put one over on you, rather than the idea that it's sort of saying, oh, well, it would have to be the Department of Defence or it would have to be the tax department. We're seeing this across the board, from very, very small organisations to very, very large. And kinds of threats that we're seeing are relatively similar, but what I would say as well is that the complexity, the notion that the attacks are well researched in terms of understanding the structure of the organisation, that happens to very small organisations as well. So don't sort of feel that because you're not necessarily massive, that someone isn't going to go ahead and buy a domain that looks like your domain and pretend to be one of the people from your company, etc. We're certainly seeing that sort of across the board. And I think it's something that people are sort of relatively slow in some cases on the uptake on that basis. It tends to sort of be, probably won't happen to us. We have heard about it, but it's something that we're not necessarily engaged with. Unfortunately, it is one of those things that if you're not prepared, if you don't have a mitigation in place, the first breach that takes place or the first attack that takes place, it might be fairly significant. There's sort of nothing to sort of say what sort of scale that would take. So the three sort of predominant threat types that we look at are around that traditional phishing with a click-through, and that's taken various forms. It changes over time. The other is around macro-enabled attachments. So attachments which don't contain a traditional malware or virus threat themselves, so they don't have sort of a worm installer attached or anything like that. They have code within the macro which is it's designed to be evasive and to go and sort of make sure that a threat is downloaded as a secondary or third stage. So you'll find that often they'll download a downloader, and then that download a threat like CryptoLocker, DriedX Trojan, those kind of things. And that will be sort of part of often again, a sort of a multi-stage, multi-vector attack. And once it happened, say it's too late. So you're sort of then in a remediation phase. So if you've had data that's been encrypted by CryptoLocker, CryptoWar, whatever it might be, you're then trying to work out, do we pay a ransom because we don't have adequate backups? Do we have backups that we can go to? It really is a scenario where it's difficult to sort of take a backward step. Another thing which is sort of scary is that there's a vast number of these threats that are introduced, but they're not detected. So I think that in one way, the encryption type ransomware is good because of how easily detectable it is, because it needs to be remediated. So if someone receives one of those threats, their machine's locked up, their network shares are locked up, an administrator immediately knows that that's occurred, it's a drag to sort out, but you're aware of what that threat sort of looks like. When we start to put in, we sort of have products which intercept click-throughs, intercept other elements, and start to sort of count up, I guess, who would have introduced a malicious threat if that wasn't there. And that's interesting from the point of view that when we put that trial in or when we introduce it as a new product, the number of threats is actually very high. So people are sort of confused in terms of saying, well, historically we're not seeing a large number of threats that we're having to remediate, but you're saying that we would have introduced a lot of threats over this short period of time. And that's because the threats are being introduced, but because they can evade endpoint security, people are just simply not aware of them. So you'll end up with things like Trojans, keyloggers down at the endpoint, and the other natural threat that we see is the sort of dummy websites where people are putting in their credentials are then owned. That might be a way to then step up through the organisation, etc. So it's scary, I guess, in terms of the time to detect or the time to become aware. A lot of the time, when people become aware is when when organisations become aware is when those gathered details are made available for sale. So that's sort of a difficult way to find out. The other thing to be aware of, and this is where we sort of talk about that trust element, a due diligence element, I guess, in terms of dealing with other people and other organisations, is that there's a direct knock-on effect potentially to your business-to-business peers, your fellow organisations, other stakeholders that you're working with, your customers, your employees. Often, it's not necessarily the organisation itself that's the first organisation that's the target. It'll be a second or a third. So with Target, it was a contractor who was looking after their air conditioning that was used to then foster an organisation, a relationship into Target itself, and you sort of see that multi-stage procedure taking place. So being responsible or having effective mitigation for your organisation is key in terms of also providing protection to all of the other people that you deal with. So there's an expectation there on some level that there'll be a strategy that you're not going to sort of be that stepping stone or that pivot into another organisation. So again, just sort of coming back to what those threats look like, the URL type threats that we're seeing, the attachment threats, and also the whaling attacks, so the idea that you'll have an impersonation fraud which is perpetrated by saying, you know, I am your CFO, I'm emailing the CEO, can you please transfer me some money, whatever it might be. They're becoming more and more complex and they're more and more well planned. So social media will be a big element of that sometimes in terms of trying to understand who is the person that we're trying to emulate. We'll use LinkedIn to sort of see what the structure of the organisation might be. If it's a listed company, we're going to have a lot of detail in terms of the structure. And we'll use that to sort of be able to introduce our threat, whatever it might be. Often we'll be looking at things like, alignments between the payload and the person. So if it's an end user or just a sort of run-of-the-mill employee, it'll often be something tantalising to sort of say, open this, it's something that you wouldn't normally get to see, it's possibly been sent to you by accident, and that's where you'll sort of see lists of people's pay or whatever it might be. And they're the kinds of things that people will just sort of double click on without thinking. And they're also socially engineered to make them enable the macro. So it'll say things like, this document's encrypted. If you want to unencrypt it, just enable macros. It's kind of tempting. People tend to do that. And then they'll end up having that threat brought down. But usually they'll be none the wiser, because what will usually also be involved is something that makes it look like they've succeeded. So if they were meant to see a document, they'll see a document, but they'll also have in the background whatever threat deployed. And we'll often see that in the kinds of threats where people are going off to a website, putting in their credentials as well. They will end up with a downloaded document if it's from Google Drive or whatever. They'll log on using their Google credentials. They'll get a file, but it's sort of just a random, irrelevant file. That's not the kind of thing that people would generally report, because it doesn't look suspicious. And that's sort of a big issue in terms of the transparency that admins have through to these type of threats as well. So if we have a look at the sort of social engineering aspect of it, we sort of need to start to accept that there's a human element to it which goes beyond what a lot of technology can deliver. And the trickiest one there, I think, is when we talk about whaling or that sort of focused CEO type fraud, we're going to see emails coming into the environment which look very legitimate for a number of reasons. So we will see that similarity of domain. We'll see a display name which looks very much like it should be. It's going to be the CEO's name or the CFO's name. And we're going to see that the language used within that email will generally be quite spot on. And we'll also have elements where the introductory email will be quite soft. So it might just be something like, are you in the office today? Can you action a payment for me? Something to sort of get that conversation started. It'll escalate up through a number of real-time interactions. One thing that we've also seen in terms of behaviour is trying to target a time frame where one of the parties is unavailable. So if people are using TripIt, something like that, or even Instagram, they'll see someone's at the airport, they're going somewhere. They'll use that opportunity to do the initial contact, apply more pressure, and we've seen this in terms of like an accounts payable type department where they feel like if they don't make a payment, they might lose their job. If they don't make a payment, they might lose a customer, and that kind of pressure gets applied. It's just much more likely under those circumstances that it's going to be completed. And it's not something that's a secret, it's not something that's new. That idea of social engineering, it's every kind of con that's ever happened over time. You can buy books about how to do it, but this is just being applied to sort of a new area. And again, the key thing is that from a security point of view or a cost basis point of view, it's changing the landscape in terms of what we spend on antivirus, anti-spam, or what we traditionally do around that antivirus, anti-spam. It doesn't correlate to what we need to do to address these threats and make sure that we've got a good balance between the potential cost and what we're doing to mitigate that cost. So I think that's something we've definitely seen is people grappling with that idea that it's not just a like-for-like replacement of antivirus, anti-spam. Whatever mix of or blend of technologies they're looking at is going to be deeper, broader, more broad spectrum, etc. So looking in depth at that whaling aspect, it is sort of key at this point. It's what most people are talking to us about, is that fear that they're going to have an email come in, it will bypass all of their processes, and they'll see some kind of asset will leave the company. So whether it's cash, whether it's a list of customers, whether it's a list of credit card numbers, whatever it might be. And they're very difficult to detect just by virtue of how they're designed. So nothing attached, not necessarily any compelling language in the first email. And with a lot of email security products, that will mean that you'll get an automatic sort of trust or whitelisting. As soon as you have a reply pair, you'll have the reputation-based services will be skipped, et cetera, et cetera. So you're then in a much higher likelihood that the exchange will continue. And at that point, they might say, oh, here's some bank details, whatever it might be. So regardless of what you call it, we're sort of seeing it, massive organisations being affected, technology companies being affected especially, which is, I guess, really important to note, that companies which are very much built around secure platforms, when you talk about sort of Snapchat and Seagate and things like that, it's really eye-opening to think that, we're seeing these really public attacks. And as I say, like, a threat type which not only has that potential outcome, but that also has such a high public profile is something sort of Very, very new. When you think about the last 10 years of antivirus, anti-spam in the email space, it's sort of a snooze fest. There's nothing sort of exciting. Maybe you get like some kind of worm which might hit the news to say it took down some computers or whatever, but it's just a different kind of space altogether, and it's massive. There's been a lot of sort of breaches. And the issue that we're seeing, or the way that it's expressed to us, is often just the idea that once they sort of jump through these initial hoops, it's the idea that the email or the contents of the email is accepted as being true, it's accepted as being trusted, and then the employee is going to carry on through with that. So when you think about how would you address that from a technology point of view, it's kind of tough. I think that's one where we've sort of said to people, what is your strategy in this space? What have you been doing? And the natural answer, and it's definitely part of the equation, is education. So we're enabling our teams to be able to recognise bad emails. We're doing what we can to help them understand what the outcomes might be in the event that they let something go, that's wrong. But the other part of that is, even if you introduce new procedures, and we've heard people talk about things like anything to do with a funds transfer requires a special secret code word and all this kind of stuff, is that because of that social engineering element, the application of any kind of pressure obviously can mean that all processes will be bypassed anyway. If you can achieve that trust, people will tend to be like, yeah, I'll just do it, it's cool. So, big issue. And it's just increasing massively. And I think that's the other thing. We're seeing the traditional spam volumes, when we look at traffic that's dropped off the back of our gateways, the traditional spam volumes are going way down because the people who perpetrate these different types of threats are recognising that this is where the money is. And Australia is strangely a really big target, I think just because we haven't been hit as hard by the GFC, and there is also a bit of a natural thing, I think, in the Australian personality, which is sort of, will take the easiest path. And I think on the ransomware side of things, Australians do tend to pay up quite a bit. So I think there's that idea that if we can pay $500, we'll pay $500 rather than try to spend 3 or 4 days recovering from backups, etc. So we see a lot of it targeted towards Australia, and the losses are mounting. So FBI at the moment is our best source of information because they are a central reporting organisation for this kind of threat. But I think what we'll see with the sort of, rhetoric we're seeing at a federal level now is probably the next 12, 24 months in Australia, we might start to see a bit more information sort of surfacing in our own region. So the kinds of threats, I think we're probably all pretty familiar with what they look like. And we'll go sort of, when we get to the product side, we'll have a look more at sort of how we deal with it. And the key thing for me, as I referred to before, is that recognition that we need endpoint protection. We need a product that's going to provide us with the best possible protection from spam, virus. That doesn't change. We need best of breed in the different areas. But then as these new threat sort of landscape evolution happens and we have sort of new targeted types of threats come out, it becomes clear that you need to assess the market, look at what's available to give me the best possible protection against that particular type of action that's coming into my organisation. And we're sort of seeing people struggling a little bit, trying to go through that normal buying cycle of, every 12 months just renewing their existing email hygiene platform, hoping that they'll be able to tweak some rules or put in some additional filters. And it's not really working for most people. So that idea that you can introduce an additional layer which can look after whether it's the attachment side of things with a sandboxing element, whether it's the URL protection with a click-through type protection, or whether it's something that's targeted around these CEO type frauds, it's going to be a blended approach. And we're seeing now companies like big organisations within Australia, when they go for a whole of security review, they won't just choose one vendor. It will be a best of breed approach, looking at all of the different aspects, trying to achieve that multiple layers of protection. So you've got the maximum number of chances to intervene with these threats. So I'll talk to you quickly about how we address these issues. We'll be around, I think in terms of that, I encourage you to come and have a chat to us. I don't want to sort of drill you on our technology, but it might get you thinking about the kinds of things that can help in this space. So, as I said, they're purpose-built tools for these particular types of threats. And the first one is around the URL type protection, and there's a few unique things here. So the idea of rewriting a URL as it passes through a gateway isn't unique. There's a few vendors out there who are doing that. I think for us, the unique elements are how we do an assessment of the URL click-through at a point in time. So this, along with the other threat types, what we're trying to do is leverage the extra time that we have between when the email arrives and when the person actually clicks or opens the attachment. We need that extra time so that we can have the best possible intelligence at any point in time. So the email lands. When it lands, there's nothing to stop it from making it through the traditional filters. So it has a great reputation. The content's fine. It's not triggering any kind of issues with the spam filters, etc. It's going to make it through to a number of inboxes. When the individuals who open that email click on the link, we'll combine intelligence from a number of different sources at that point in time. So we'll revisit what's the reputation of the sender now. Might have been 10 minutes. Their reputation might have changed drastically in that time frame. We'll also do a deep analysis of the website itself in terms of its behaviour. So that particular page, how does it behave? But also the background website, how does that behave? Is there something broader going on there that we need to know about? Is it suddenly trying to do a bunch of redirects? Is it trying to download an executable? So there's an action element there. And then also the reputation, so your more traditional web filtering. So we've got a sort of a broad spectrum of elements that we'll assess. We'll make a consensus decision about whether we think it's malicious or not. And in that way, we'll either pass it through with low latency to the end user, they browse as normal. And then if it's a bad site, they'll be blocked. And in most cases, based on the policy, it wouldn't be a warning. It wouldn't be continue anyway. It would be a hard block, and you wouldn't be sort of allowing the end user to make any kind of decision. What we build in addition is a user awareness element. So what that's doing is saying, for a percentage of click-throughs, might be 1 in 20, might be 1 in 10, we want to put in front of people something to think about in terms of their use of email, and it'll tend to be, this is the source email address, this is a target website, do you know these people, were you expecting this email, do you still want to proceed, yes or no? If it's a bad website, we're still going to block it, but we build up rich detail in the background in terms of who are the potential high-risk employees, who are the ones who are clicking through and would have introduced a threat if we didn't have a mitigation in place. And then more importantly, who are the ones who were shown the prompt and then still made a bad decision. So you're sort of able to drill down. It's also dynamic in terms of if they're making poor decisions, they'll see more of those prompts over time. It tends to bring the discussion back around to IT without them having to chase people down. They'll sort of be, why am I getting all these prompts? Well, you're not very good at clicking on emails. So that element tends to relate mainly to these type of emails. It'll be your AFP subpoenas, your post parcels, that kind of stuff, utility bills where it's a false click-through. And what we're providing there is, again, you don't need to roll out any end-user tools. It's a very lightweight introduction from an admin point of view and doesn't require a lot of intervention. From the attachment point of view, we do sandboxing, like a lot of organisations do sandboxing. We provide, though, a 100% safe, zero latency option for the sandbox as well, which is key. So what we're able to do is say, what we want to do is for all of those types of documents which need to be sandboxed, which is Office documents and PDFs, basically, the ones where the macros can be compromised. On the fly, transcribe it into a PDF, which is read-only, flat from a macro point of view, send that to the end user, along with instructions on how to release the original. So what you can imagine is happening there, and I think I've got a slide of what that looks like. What you can imagine is happening there is the person's able to read the attachment immediately. If they need the original, they can release it. But what's key there is that you've immediately shrunk down the potential for any threat to escape the sandbox to only those emails which are consciously reviewed and then deliberately released. And you're also increasing the amount of time that you've got for the sandbox to recognise the threat. So 0-hour threat, 0-minute threat, you're increasing that time for the sandbox to have the intelligence if it's something that no one's ever seen before globally. But this file here can't contain a threat. So that's fundamental in terms of being able to make sure that you've got a strategy that works. As an admin, you can work different strategies for different people. So you can say, I want to sandbox everything for this group of people. They're in accounts. They always get macro-enabled spreadsheets. They don't want to release every single file. Just depends on your strategy. You can apply all of these policies in a granular way. If they get blocked, again, they would have to engage support essentially your admins to release the file if they think it's legitimate, but will also provide a good level of detail in terms of what it was trying to do. And most of the things that it was trying to do, it'll be pretty clear that no legitimate macro would be trying to do that. So you'll be able to just explain to the user that the file is bad. It's easy in terms of the intuitive nature of it. So if they open that other attachment, it's just got a one-click release. Click on there. 5 minutes later, they'll get their attachment release. So the average processing time in the sandbox is about 5 minutes, during which time we put it through all of its different paces. So emulated environment, throw all of the different parameters at it, change time. It'll think it's been sitting there for an hour, because a lot of the threats now will sit for half an hour trying to make the sandbox time out. All of those different sort of evasions that it'll try and go through. And at a point in time, we'll be doing the best possible analysis there. Again, it'll either come through or it won't. And from an impersonation point of view, we've tried to look at all of these different use cases, look at the factors which are going to be of value, but then be clever in terms of how we apply that. So if we looked at any one of these elements, we're likely to get a high rate of false positive, which would make it next to useless. Particularly when we know that we're dealing with CFOs, we're dealing with accounts people, their email flow needs to be relatively unobstructed. So what we do is we look to combine these factors in a way that makes sense for you. What I'm seeing is that for most people, they will look at all of these factors, but they'll look for a minimum of 2 before they raise the alarm. So if we have a threat, and this is a real threat that came through to us, we get lots of fancy ones that come through trying to get Mimecast to do stuff. But you'll see here we've got the domain which has been registered, which is pretty similar. It's MLM instead of MIM. That's the name of our CEO. So they've used a display name which is consistent with our CEO. We've got the term W2, which is an American term, but again relates to that tax sort of element. And that's some of the factors that we look at. So we'll look at the domain similarity. You decide how similar is a problem for you. We look at that name, we look at the key terms, and we also look at the age and activity of the domain. So has the domain been newly registered? But also, if it hasn't been newly registered, has it been behaving like a business email service should? Has it been sitting late and then suddenly just send a little bit of email? Or has it been acting over time in a consistent fashion? The thing that most people will do is tagging. So they'll deliver the email anyway, they'll tag to bring a higher level of suspicion to that email, a much higher level of due diligence. The other thing I'm seeing customers do is notification groups. So you'll have a group where it's all the people who can transfer money, all the people who can access HR records. If they receive a suspicious email, you'll also notify either their peers or a group of overseers who can then get a second set of eyes onto that email as part of that procedure. So really powerful, again, very low administrative overhead. You insert it in line, there's no end user tool. So they're the key elements. So they're the 3 ways that we sort of get in there. And I guess just revisiting the fact that with 95% of those threats originating in that email space, you need to have a strategy. So whether it's us, whether it's something else, you need to have a strategy for those 3. From a Mimecast point of view, we are in country from a data center point of view, the single jurisdiction, so it doesn't fail over out of country, but also in terms of our presence here. So we've got big office in Melbourne, office in Sydney. We're expanding all around at the moment, but that's sort of in the last sort of 24 months, we've been making sure that we've got a presence here, not just for sales, but we've got service desk, service delivery, professional services, customer experience, they all live here. And the broader sort of scope. So if there's other things like archiving, continuity, etc., that can be part of a whole different discussion, but the security is just part of a broader stack. So that's it. I think we're just about out of time, but if there's a couple of questions, we can go ahead and do those. Otherwise, we'll be at the booth for the next few days and no doubt see you around at the various events. So if there are any questions there, I think you put them into your app. Anything?
Just with the low admin overhead, if you're going to get that granularity for certain groups and certain people,
Yep.
you're still going to have someone, your admins or whatever maintain.
Yeah, so essentially you'll have AD integration. So generally, when you're doing the rollout, our connect process involves, I guess, setting up that initial structure. So for those kind of ones where you'd have an A and a B, where it's essentially maybe the sandboxing versus on-demand sandboxing, it'd be just a matter from then on of dropping people into those groups. So on an ongoing basis, there doesn't seem to tend to be a lot. Yeah, exactly. And for us, like, we don't sort of just throw you the keys and run away. That delivery process is well guided by the service delivery team. Anyone else? Cool. Well, thanks for your attention. Do feel free to come up if there are any other questions, and enjoy the rest of the event.
So can we once again just thank Ben Adamson for his presentation? And if you give us a few minutes and we'll change over for the next session. Thanks very much. Just a reminder, if you can rate the sessions through the app as well, the AusCERT app. Thank you very much.